So let's start from the top. Again, thank you all for joining us. Our plan today is to update you on what Together for Choice has been doing over the last few months since we last spoke. And then that'll leave plenty of time also for folks to raise any comments or ask any questions. Before we get started, let me make a little bit of a pitch. Organizational members are going to be receiving from us in the coming days and weeks a notice for renewal of your membership. And we obviously very much encourage you to renew your membership. Obviously, we rely on organizational memberships, which do have a small fee associated with them, to meet our operational budget, which is a very small budget, but nonetheless, we need to be able to cover our expenses. So I encourage all of you to please, when you get that notice, to renew your membership. As I think all of you know, individual memberships have no charge associated with them. We do obviously request for those who feel inclined and are able to do so to make a contribution to our organization. Again, it's through those contributions and organizational membership fees that we're able to carry on our activities. There are, in some instances, some folks who are signing up as individual members, even though you represent organizations. And in doing so, trying to avoid paying rather modest fees. We really would hope that if you are participating on behalf of an organization, that you sign up your organization and pay the appropriate fee associated with that. With that bit of business out of the way, let me talk about what we've been up to over the last few months. As you know, we have a new administration in Washington that's now been in place since January 20th. And that has brought a lot of activity that concerns us. That activity is focused primarily on, is from our perspective, preserving 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is under attack by some folks in Congress, and also to ensure that ICFs get treated equally with home and community-based settings. And again, there are efforts being made in Washington to treat HCBS settings more favorably, and that could have a very detrimental effect on ICFs. So let me start first with what we're doing with respect to 14C. There are a couple of proposals pending in Congress now. One is the Raise the Wage Act, and the other is the Transformation to Competitive Employment Act. Both of these bills would phase out 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act, and therefore require all organizations to pay at least the minimum wage to individuals with disabilities without regard to their productivity or lack thereof. And of course, that would have a very detrimental effect on not only the organizations that are then required to increase their costs, but also on the individuals with disabilities who they employ. And these are primarily individuals with very significant intellectual disabilities who really are not able to get employment in the community, or if they are, it's only for a few hours a week, and they rely on the work programs provided by nonprofit organizations to fill out the rest of their week. And so we have been very busy over the last few months talking to members of Congress, both in the House and in the Senate, and both Democrats and Republicans, to explain the importance of preserving 14C. And we've gotten a fairly good and bipartisan response. I know I've mentioned before on our calls that Congressman Schneider, who's here in North Suburban Chicago, is a supporter of preserving Section 14C for individuals with significant intellectual disabilities who are engaged in work programs offered by nonprofit service providers. And back in 2018, when the Raise the Wage Act was brought before that Congress, he sponsored an amendment to Section 6 of that act that would preserve Section 14C for those folks. He has indicated to us that he's willing to sponsor that same amendment again, should 14C phase out again come to the floor of the House. And so we've been out talking to other members of Congress and senators and apprising them of Congressman Schneider's proposed amendment, asking them to be willing to either co-sponsor that amendment or at least to support it. And we've gotten pretty good responses from both sides of the aisle. Just as for example, we talked to Representative Kahana in California, who is a very progressive Democrat. And when we explained to him the issues and how it would impact those with significant intellectual disabilities, he understood the need to preserve 14C for those folks and said he would support Congressman Schneider's amendment. At the same time, we also had conversations with Senator Romney's office. He's obviously a Republican from Utah. And he also saw the value in what we were talking about and agreed to support revising the phase out of 14C so it would be preserved for folks with significant intellectual disabilities. But we are not resting. We are continuing to talk to as many members of Congress who are willing to talk to us. I had a conversation with the office of Congressman Krishnamurthy yesterday on this very subject, and continuing to try to garner support for Representative Schneider's amendment that would preserve 14C. So that's what we're doing there. Now, in terms of the prospects of the Raise the Wage Act and the Transformation to Competitive Employment Act, as you know, Democrats have a very narrow majority in the House, and it's a evenly divided 50-50 Senate. The Senate parliamentarian in March ruled that the increasing of the minimum wage, including the phase out of 14C, is not something that can be passed by the budget reconciliation rules, which allow just a 51 vote majority. And therefore, any change in the minimum wage, including the phase out of 14C, presumably would need to garner a supermajority in the Senate, that is at least 60 votes, which would require at this point 10 Republican votes. So it does not look like that's gonna happen. But we don't know that for sure. But that's just what the prognosis looks like right now. We're obviously not resting. We're not relying on that. And we're going to continue to educate members of Congress on the importance of preserving 14C should it come to a vote. On the equitable treatment of ICFs, you may recall that in the bill that was passed, the American Rescue Plan, which was the most recent COVID relief bill back in March, Congress increased the federal portion of Medicaid for home and community-based settings by 10 percentage points. And they did not do the same thing for ICFs. Now, this is a temporary increase. It lasts for a year. But during this year's time, states will receive more federal reimbursement for HCBS settings than they will for ICF settings. We fought that, not that we were against increasing federal funding of HCBS, but we made the point that if you're going to do that for HCBS, you need to do it for ICFs too. The whole purpose of that increase was to help settings meet increased pandemic-related costs. ICFs have those very same increased costs, whether it be PPE or personnel costs. And so they really needed to increase that for ICFs as well. We proposed specific statutory language to be included in the rescue plan. And we got that before a number of members of Congress. Unfortunately, our language did not get included. And so the rescue plan, as passed, does provide favorable treatment for HCBS settings over ICFs. Then Biden announced his infrastructure plan, that is the American Jobs Plan. And in that plan, he proposed to increase funding for HCBS settings by $400 billion, including relief for DSP workers, that is to enhance the pay of DSP workers and otherwise try to meet the workforce crisis faced by HCBS settings. Again, in that plan, there is no similar relief provided for ICFs. And so we have also been talking to members of Congress about the importance of treating ICFs equal to those of HCBS. Our concern is if a more permanent increase in federal funding for HCBS over ICFs is enacted, it'll create a huge incentive for states to move folks out of ICFs and essentially force them into HCBS settings, because the state will save a heck of a lot of money by doing that, because the feds will contribute a higher percentage of the cost for HCBS settings than ICF settings. So that's our concern with what Biden has proposed in the infrastructure plan. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have been reading in the press the fact that there's been efforts at a bipartisan infrastructure proposal. And I think that if there is a bipartisan proposal that goes through, it probably will not include this $400 billion for HCBS, because that's what you might call, what Republicans are calling soft infrastructure, and not the kind of infrastructure spending that they support. You probably have read that the first effort at a bipartisan infrastructure proposal with the Republican senator from West Virginia, those talks have failed and have stopped. But the press is also reporting that Biden is continuing to have discussions with other groups of senators to try to reach a bipartisan proposal. So we're watching that very closely. There has been no specific language yet that has been publicly announced as to how this $400 billion for HCBS would be spent. But the point we are making with members of Congress is that the staff crisis is the same in HCBS and in ICF. And again, they must both be treated equally. Finally, on that subject, you may be aware that Representative Dingell and Senators Casey and Hassan have proposed what's called the HCBS Access Act. And under that proposed statute, there would be some very significant changes made to the Medicaid statute, such that HCBS settings would become a mandatory Medicaid service. ICFs would not be a mandated Medicaid service. the feds would fund HCBS settings 100%. There'd be no change in the funding, federal funding of ICFs. And that would create a huge, I think, irresistible incentive for states to move folks out of ICFs and require everybody to live in an HCBS setting. This obviously reduces options, it reduces choice, it forces folks from their homes, their chosen homes. And so we have strongly opposed that proposed statute. There was a comment period that ended toward the end of April. We submitted our comments explaining why this was a bad idea. And again, made the point that you need to treat ICF settings equal to HCBS settings and let the individual and their families make the decision that best meets their needs and preferences. The HCBS Access Act has not actually been filed with Congress yet. It's not been submitted. There was only a draft bill, and the draft that was circulated publicly was not a complete bill. They had a workforce development section that had not been filled out yet. And to my knowledge, that still is work that is yet to be done. I don't know that that bill is going anywhere. Again, it's not something that can pass by budget reconciliation because it's not solely a budget matter. It makes some very substantive changes to Medicaid. So it would require at least 10 Republican senators to support that bill. So I'm not feeling terribly threatened by it, but obviously it's something we need to keep an eye on. And I think it provides a very good vehicle for us to use to talk to members of Congress about the importance of supporting ICFs, allowing families to make choice, and maintaining, if not expanding, options for individuals and families. So that's where things stand at the federal level. Ashley, if I can ask you for a minute to maybe talk a bit about your work in Pennsylvania and other places. I think folks would be interested to hear what's going on there as well.
Oh, yes. Hi. Just want to let everyone know I posted the Schneider Amendment in our chat box. So if you have any questions about that, you can just download the document and if you have any questions, and if you would like to share that amendment with folks in your area and arrange a follow-up meeting with us, we'd be happy to do so. So please let us know.
Yeah, Ashley, I'm glad you mentioned that. Before you go on to states, then let me just make this other mention this other thing. Any of you that have a relationship with a member of Congress, be that a House member of the House or the Senate, Democrat or Republican, please let us know and we'll help you make connections with that person and join you in a call. There are some folks out in Utah that connected me up with one of the congressmen out there so we could talk about 14C and our other concerns. You know, we do the best we can at reaching out to members of Congress, but it's always much more helpful if the person, one of the people involved in the outreach is a constituent of that member of Congress. So if any of you have connections, relationships with, or know somebody who does, who can help us get in touch with members of Congress, please let us know and we'll be happy to work with you on that.
Oh, yes. Hi. Just want to let everyone know I posted the Schneider Amendment in our chat box. So if you have any questions about that, you can just download the document and if you have any questions, and if you would like to share that amendment with folks in your area and arrange a follow-up meeting with us, we'd be happy to do so. So please let us know.
Yeah, Ashley, I'm glad you mentioned that. Before you go on to states, then let me just make this other mention this other thing. any of you that have a relationship with a member of Congress, be that a House member of the House or the Senate, Democrat or Republican, please let us know, and we'll help you make connections with that person and join you in a call. There are some folks out in Utah that connected me up with one of the congressmen out there, so we could talk about 14C and our other concerns. We do the best we can at reaching out to members of Congress, but it's always much more helpful if the person, one of the people involved in the outreach, is a constituent of that member of Congress. So if any of you have connections, relationships with, or know somebody who does, who can help us get in touch with members of Congress, please let us know, and we'll be happy to work with you on that.
Okay. Also, Scott, actually, some folks are asking about the ICF issue, so maybe it might be good to address it right now. Jim actually said that it appears that ICFs currently have a favorable treatment compared to HCBS. Specifically, states may not limit access to ICF services or make it subject to waiting lists as they may for HCBS. So is there a danger that comes from asking for parity between ICFs and HCBS?
Well, I mean, there is this, all that is really more theory than fact. Yes, in theory, you're not supposed to have waiting lists for ICFs. But in many states, there is no room in any ICF. And states say you first need to go to an HCBS setting before we even consider you for an ICF. And so that's really what's happening. In addition, states, Illinois being included in that, my state, they won't license new ICFs. So whatever ICF beds exist today, that's what exists. And they're not allowing more. Where obviously they'll happily license more HCBS beds. So yes, there are waiting lists for HCBS spots in many states, but ICFs are also not available in many states. And so I really don't think there's a risk in asking for equitable treatment. I mean, if somebody asked me, what would you like to see in the way of federal requirements, I think both ICFs and HCBS should be mandatory Medicaid services, so that states have to offer both. And then, of course, the feds, along with the states, should adequately fund both. That's the equitable treatment that I think is appropriate and what we're advocating for.
Yeah. Harris Cap was asking if somebody from ICF somehow finds competitive employment, if that would affect their eligibility to stay in an ICF.
I don't think that's the case, although I think now we're getting into areas. It's certainly not the case under federal law. Obviously, states have their own sets of rules, and so I can't speak to all 50 states. I know in Illinois that is not the case. People in ICFs can get competitive employment. It doesn't jeopardize their funding for their ICF.
Okay. Yep. So, I think that's pretty much the case. And some folks have reached out saying that they're interested in sharing the amendment with others and follow up with you. So
Sure.
I've given
Great.
out your email address, and if others that would like to, share that and reach out and arrange a meeting and have one of us attend, and our pro bono counselors are readily available, please let us know. So Judith,
now on the amendment, let me just point out, it is not the ideal amendment. TFC had actually drafted its own amendment to Section 6 of Raise the Wage Act, which would have been a broader preservation of 14C. But this is what Congressman Schneider is willing to sponsor. And the main limitation in it, which we would prefer not be there but is that it would preserve 14C for nonprofit organizations. Nonprofit organizations would continue to be able to obtain 14C certificates if they have one today. It would not permit new nonprofit organizations from obtaining new certificates. That's an unfortunate limitation in our point of view. At the same time, at least it preserves what exists today. And it's the only thing that where we have a member of Congress saying, I can support this, I will support this, I will sponsor it. And so we have made the decision to ride that horse, even though it's not ideal. Also, just, historically, the number of certificate holders is declining, not increasing. The number of folks working on their certificates is declining, it is not increasing. And so we think it's a reasonable trade-off to make, even though it's not ideal.
Yeah. I just want to comment on some folks talking about how Judith mentioned that the ARC and other organizations are arguing that people are being forced into institutional or ICF settings because there aren't enough HCBS opportunities, because they claim there's no wait list for institutional settings. And she's saying that's not true. I completely agree that that claim is just not true. I mean, it's much harder to find ICF placement than HCBS. And, that's something that I end up having to fight about all the time. But people are not forced into ICFs. They're actually forced out of ICF, not into. So that's my comment.
And also, to be clear, we don't support the existence of waiting lists for HCBS.
No.
We would be supportive of the elimination of waiting lists. What we don't support is doing it in a way that penalizes ICFs or that threatens the existence of ICFs. And certainly there are ways of eliminating wait lists for HCBS that can be done without threatening or punishing ICFs.
Yeah. So I just wanted to, so Susan mentioned that we're in the process of trying to find the number of IDD individuals who were inappropriately placed in nursing homes as the HCBS settings were not able to handle their profound needs. The state is dragging its feet, and on giving us this information, we think the numbers are staggeringly high.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard that that's a very serious issue, that folks are in nursing homes that should not be in nursing homes. Right. And, one of the reasons is because there are not places that can adequately serve them.
Right.
So, and it's a serious problem. There's no question about that.
Yeah, sorry about that. I keep getting messages from folks that are not able to log in. So if I sound very distracted, that's because I am. But I wanted to share more about what's been happening at the state level. As many of you already know, the settings rule with CMS revising the guidance in 2019 pretty much left things up to the states to implement the changes and basically kind of take this to the final stage of implementation of the settings rule. And unfortunately, when the settings rule was first introduced, many states decided to make a lot of changes to comply with the settings rule, not anticipating that CMS was going to change its guidance in 2019. So Unfortunately, there are states that are still following the old guidance. And, for example, Pennsylvania is one of the most restrictive states, and has the most restrictive interpretation of the settings rule. And because of that, they've actually passed state regulations to prohibit funding for intentional communities, any disability specific communities, and they restrict the number of participants in a program. So what that translates to is that individuals who require higher level of support that could thrive in disability specific settings are being denied their rights to access those settings. And even if they actually try to find something, nothing's available in their state. So we have a situation where one of our members' sons were doing really well at a farm-based school program, but once they aged out of the school at the age of 21, they had to go into a small group home, and mind you, their budget was like $1 million per person per year, but it did not work, and now they're actually in a congregant setting on an emergency respite funding by the state, until they could find something more appropriate for their needs. And so we've been very involved with that, and Pennsylvania has pretty much denied that they were doing anything wrong, and they were arguing that they were only following the settings rule. So we've been fighting with them for many months, and now we have gotten many advocates at the state level involved. We started working with the chair of the House Health and Human Services Committee, who is pretty much leading the chart, and we're collaborating with a congressman that's writing to CMS. We're working on reaching out to other legislators to pass an amendment at the state level to really force the state to lift all the restrictions. And we're really hoping that this would set a good precedent for other states as well. Because I know that other states are kind of trying to do the same by implementing very restrictive measures, by prohibiting, congregate settings, or limiting the number of people that can live together or receive services together. And this is really happening more at the state level now. California, before COVID, was actually trying to cut off funding for larger congregate settings. But with this whole COVID, they put a stop to it. But now what we are hearing is that because of those day programs were pretty much put on hold, they want to make that permanent and get rid of all the day-side services. So we're hearing a lot of concerns from providers and families about the direction in California and other states as well. And with the new administration, with the new DOJ, they're going after all these different states, trying to accuse site-based services of unnecessarily segregating people from the greater community, which we had heard a lot before. It's actually, all those things are coming back at this point. So we're just trying to fight things at the ground level, state by state. We also know of one family who was denied access to a congregant setting in the state of Michigan because that setting happened to be on heightened scrutiny list. Not because they were denied, like they didn't pass the heightened scrutiny, they were on this heightened scrutiny list, and therefore they would never be eligible for HBS funding. So we're getting a lot of misinformation from different states. And when our members reach out to us, we work with them, we try to clarify all the information, and we try to work with them to let the state know that what they're doing is actually, not complying with the settings rule. Is there anything else that we can, do you have any questions or?
Actually, I guess the other thing, I don't know if you mentioned this, I think you didn't, is that we worked with a congressman in Pennsylvania, Congressman Fitzpatrick, who asked us to draft some questions for him to CMS that we hope would sort of highlight where the state of Pennsylvania is going wrong in interpreting the settings rule. And I think we submitted maybe 10 questions to the congressman we
Yes.
helped draft the questions that he wanted to ask. And he wrote the letter to CMS. And I guess this would have been probably now a month and a half ago or so.
Yeah.
And we're still waiting for CMS to respond. I think we may be waiting a long time for them to respond because I don't think they want to respond. But if CMS does respond and responds accurately, honestly, I think it'll really show how Pennsylvania and other states are misinterpreting the settings rule. And it'll make the states own up. Either they're going to have to then say, yes, we're going to comply with just what the settings rule requires, or they'll have to be honest and say, no, we want to go even further than the settings rule, which of course they have a right to do.
Yeah, Stephanie was asking if the situation in Massachusetts is similar to that in Pennsylvania. I don't think so. I've heard that Massachusetts is a little bit better, but I don't really know of any state in America that fully supports or openly supports intentional communities. But for some reason, they just, there's like a push to go smaller and, putting away the walls. They always say program without walls. Like that's like the new thing these days. And I don't think that's really appropriate for a lot of people.
Actually, Bill Anderson asked if
Yes.
we could share the Fitzpatrick letter. Are we able to
Yes.
do that?
Yes, I will do that right now.
Okay. The other thing that's important, if you were to come to us with issues in your state, is obviously the more folks from your state that you can bring together who are supportive of your position and are facing similar issues, the stronger our argument is. And again, you're in a much better position in your state to organize those folks than we are. We'll help you, but we're going to rely a lot on you to bring together families with a common interest, so that when we go to the state, we can say, hey, here's 30, here's 50, here's 100 folks that are being affected by what you're doing, being adversely affected by what you're doing. Any other questions or comments or anything?
Harris is asking if what the bill number is. I mean, the bill number.
The bill number for 14C?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is no, for the Schneider Amendment, there is no bill number because it's not, first of all, it's not going to be a separate bill. It will be a proposed amendment to the phase out of 14C. And he will file it when 14C comes up for, the phase out of 14C comes up for consideration. So there is no bill number I can give you at this point.
So does anyone have something to share or to celebrate?
This is Ray Carmody from Trinity Services.
Yes, hi, Ray.
Hey, Ray.
Chicago, how are you?
Good.
I want to go back to your comments about finding people in nursing homes, people with ID in nursing homes who are placed inappropriately. Could you just revisit that for a second? Who's doing the looking for those people? Is it the feds? Is it the state? The reason I ask is because if you have people, a high number of people with developmental disabilities who are placed in nursing facilities, it's, if you go back to OBRA 89, the prohibition of placing anybody in a geriatric nursing home with DD, or pretty much anybody, it kind of jumps out that you still have people going in.
Yeah, I don't know, Ray, who's doing the looking. I know, I know that from time to time when I meet with folks from Equipment Equality, they are always raising the point that there are folks in nursing homes inappropriately here in Illinois. And I don't know whether they're trying to ferret that out or if there's somebody else that's doing it.
The other thing I just wanted to mention, Scott, was this whole idea of ICFDDs in our state. And I think this is an accurate statement. For the most part, the independent service coordinators don't even offer ICFDD vacancies as a choice for people. And I always think about, and by the way, Scott knows this, the Obra thing that I was talking about is close to my heart because I was the Obra coordinator for the state of Illinois. But so you get an 80-year-old mom in crisis. Maybe she's going into the hospital. Maybe dad just died. There's an immediate placement needed, and you have an appropriate and good ICFDD for somebody that could go in today, or tomorrow. And it's not even why the ICFDD community in Illinois has not filed a lawsuit about that is beyond me. But
you're right, Ray. And in fact, that's one of the things we fought for in the Legis decree, is that the ISCs are supposed to identify all options for the individual and their family, including ICF. And if they're not doing that, then they're not in compliance with the decree. Somebody just put a question in the chat about, again, the Schneider Amendment, and asking if we could get the ideal amendment, what would that be? And, would we, if we could find some member of Congress to support that, is that what we would support? First of all, what I'll do is I'll ask Ashley to post our proposed amendment to 14C so you can see what we have proposed. The issue of trying to push for that is I'm very, very concerned about creating division among folks that might support the preservation of 14C in some form or another. I don't think that helps us. And, we have tried to get folks to support our version of 14C, and what we've come up with was we've got support for Schneider's amendment. So I don't think getting support for what we propose is a realistic option. But again, even if we could find some folks who would be willing to support that, we might lose those folks who are willing to support the more limited Schneider amendment. And I don't think we can afford to lose any support. So I'd be, this was a question we struggled with. Do we support the Schneider Amendment, or do we say, hey, it's not good enough, we want something better? And there was a lot of discussion and disagreement among the leadership at TFC over this issue. But ultimately, we decided we were best off going with the Schneider Amendment. So that's where we're at this point.
But I just wanted to add that even if people are not taking away 14C right now, there are states that are trying to transition people out of shelter workshops. So basically, in the state of Utah, what they're saying is you can have your child up to 2 years right now. Your child has 2 years to transition to competitive employment. And after 2 years, you have to leave. And so that's what's actually happening in Utah. It's already happened in Washington State. And there are more states trying to transition people out. I believe New York is doing that too. I've seen some posts by families saying that we just found out that my brother's workshop is going to shut down and my brother has to transition into competitive employment. And that's happening in many, many places without this legislation going anywhere. So
right.
What happens then?
Yep. Yeah, the 14C battle is not just a federal battle. It's a battle at the state level. It's a battle at the local level, because there are some cities that have phased out 14C or are in the process of doing that in their city. And so we've got, we have to fight this war on a number of fronts. And I think that's why it's important, Ashley, if we can post our amendment for people to see, because that amendment, often will work at the state level and the local level as well, with obviously some tweaks to fit what's being proposed. But you can use that as a model and then try to argue, look, why get rid of 14C completely, especially since we don't know how that's going to impact people? Why not preserve it for those folks who really are not going to be able to get competitive employment. And you don't want them, if they can have a 14C job, to be in a day program instead, or at least have them in a day program 40 hours a week instead of having them, maybe work for 20 at a 14C job and then 20 in a day program. So let's try to, I try to pitch this, the Schneider Amendment, but even ours, it's really a compromise between the advocates who say just get rid of 14C altogether, and those who are saying, no, keep 14C, don't change it, it's fine, there's no problem. This is a middle ground. And I think if we pitch it that way and say this is something that can get support from progressives, from conservatives, because all we're talking about is preserving it for folks that really need it, those with significant IDD. Nobody that doesn't want to work at a 14C job is forced to do it, and only nonprofits that are here to help these folks are the ones who can get the 14C certificates. And so I think it's a solid middle ground to take that I hope would work both at the state level and local level as well.
Carol was asking if there was any data on what happens to those forced out of 14C, and I just said not yet. I mean, we have looked into doing this study.
There's smatterings of data, and what I'll try to do, Ashley, is I'll send you some data that I have, and really, a lot of it comes out of, if you recall, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights did a study of 14C. And despite the overwhelming comments from folks saying, let's keep 14C, the majority of the commission recommended getting rid of 14C. But there were 3 dissenting commissioners that wrote their own dissenting statements. And in one of them, the commissioner included what data existed on how people are not helped by getting rid of 14C. And so I've collected it for some other purposes and for other folks, and I'll try to pull that together again and send it to you, Ashley, and then we can post some of that on our website so for folks to see. But there's been no comprehensive study. I mean, that's one of the points we make with folks in trying to convince them not to get rid of 14C is there's been no study of what has happened to folks, especially those with significant IDD, when you get rid of 14C. What is out there seems to suggest that those with significant IDD will be the ones who are adversely affected by getting rid of it because they will lose their job opportunities. They can't get competitive employment. And so they'll be in day programs, they'll be home watching TV, they'll be doing non-productive activities. Right. That's what the data we have, that's what that data shows, but nothing's been done in a comprehensive way.
Let me jump over for a second to supported employment. We were looking at this pretty hard a couple of years ago, and I believe that the average amount of time nationwide that people spend in supported employment jobs is 12 hours per week. Now, if that be the case, you're 12 hours, 15 hours, whichever you pick.
Yep.
The question becomes, what about the other 25 hours?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. My way of looking at this, Ray, and again, the data that exists supports exactly what you're saying. Because even if you look at what the National Council on Disabilities published a few years back, who again advocated for getting rid of 14C, they were touting all these success stories like Rhode Island and Vermont and places like that have gotten rid of 14C or gotten rid of their sheltered workshops. And they say, look at all these folks that are now in competitive employment. Well, first of all, the number of folks that are in competitive employment, the increase in competitive employment doesn't equal the number of folks that were in sheltered workshops.
Right.
Some got competitive employment, but most ended up in day programs. Those that did get competitive employment, again, it was for 10 hours a week, 12 hours a week, or whatever. What do they do for the rest of their week? So To me, there are basically two categories of folks that we're dealing with here. There are some who might be able to get some level of competitive employment for a small amount of hours during the week. What do they do with the rest of their time? And there are other folks, my daughter is among these, who she's never going to have competitive employment. But she can do a shelter workshop job, with support, with somebody sitting next to her and reminding her of every step along the way of the job of how do you fold a towel, for example. And it doesn't matter if it takes her 5 minutes to fold a towel. That's fine because she's in a shelter workshop. She's never going to get competitive employment. And there are lots of folks like her. The only employment they will ever have is in a sheltered workshop. And that option needs to be available to them. Again, I'd like to just thank everybody for joining us and for asking your questions and making your comments. Hope everybody has a great summer. Looks like the pandemic is sort of on its way out, which is great news. We can all maybe enjoy ourselves a little bit more and see our family a little bit more. So I hope everybody has a great summer, and we will let you know when we have our next member call.
Yes, our next member call will be in September, and we will record this. We will post this recording on our website on the media page. So please check back later tonight or sometime early tomorrow. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful summer. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.